What techniques do you need to consider when asking for contribution? Welcome everyone to another episode of the Value for Value podcast. I'm your host Kyrin Down, host of the Mere Mortals and Mere Mortals book reviews as well. But this is the podcast for digital content creators who want to connect deeper with their audience and also be able to monetize at the same time without the use of having to resort to ads, dynamic ad insertion, or host reads or sponsorships or anything like that. No, this is the way where you can do this all directly from your fans, which is an amazing thing. And there's a lot of technology and very cool things that have been happening in the podcasting 2.0 world, which allow all of this to happen. But there is a burning question at this, which is you need to ask. And this is the biggest thing to get over. I've talked about this previously, but I have had some suggestions from listeners. I think it was Gene Bean and someone else as well, maybe, who were asking for a compilation of value for value pitches of how are the best people doing this? What are some tactics, some techniques I need to think about when I'm doing this? I have already somewhat covered this in season 2, but I'm going to do another version here. So what I've done is I went to the Hot on Fountain chart. So basically, you can kind of see Fountain, one of the podcasting apps. They have their own method of showcasing which shows are popular just based on how much support, and in this case, it's Satoshis coming in from their listeners, and they create a little chart for themselves there. So I went to that. And I chose 4 that were basically near the top of it, but that I hadn't already covered in season 2 because you might just be hearing the same sort of pitch again. So what we're going to do for this episode, we'll listen to those back to back, and then I'll let you know who they were so you can have a little guesstimate and see if you're aware of what's going on in value for value in some of these shows. And then I'll do a little bit of analysis of them, some takeaways from that before we get into our own sections here at the end of support, some tips, some applications, some service highlights, and some V for V, all of my own. So I'm going to play this section here. We're going to listen to this for about 5 minutes, and then, we'll do a little bit of analysis.
It wasn't a big support week. Now, you think about what the Dad Pod's doing here, helping you sort out the things coming down the pipe and thinking about Bitcoin in the right way. It's a pretty big value. So if you've gotten some value from the show, please consider sending it back. You can use a new podcast app at podcastapps.com. Fountain has a 1.0 just around the corner. It's really cooking up. Podfans is coming along. Podverse's developer has now gone full-time for at least the next 3 months. They left their day job and they're going all in on Podverse. So the apps are really humming these days if you haven't checked them out in a while.
Wait, Podverse was a part-time project?
Yeah, him and his brother and then of course community contributions, some which come from the JB community. But otherwise part-time. I know he's been working on it for years and years, and so he's going to really try to make it sing for a bit. It's just such an exciting time for those apps. So if you haven't tried them, it's great because they got the boost button right there. Otherwise, get Alby, top it off directly either in the app using like MoonPay, or you can do on-chain or RoboSats over Lightning, whatever you want. Just getalby.com, then you boost from the Index's website, or Fountain FM. You can also boost from their website now. We'll have links in the show notes. Thank you everybody who boosted in. We had 7 boosters and we stacked 23,322 sats total.
Well, I have to say, this felt like kind of a light week. So a light boost week doesn't make me feel guilty,
But that's for last week. This week, I know.
This was for last week?
Yeah.
You guys need to pick it up. You need to pick it up, y'all.
Yeah, I know, right? Well, and maybe we should think about what we should ask people to boost in about, because like we talked about Sam, I'd like to know if they'd prefer we just don't bother covering that, because it's getting covered, or do they want to hear a take on it? Those types of things are always things I welcome for boosts. So if you hear something in the show and you want to hear more of it or less of it, send it in gently via a boost. We take that very seriously.
It really encourages us in any value for value podcast. I was listening to Living Up on a... Have you heard the latest Living Up on a Donut?
Not yet.
They have, like, the donation, the notes segment is good, man.
Oh.
People are sending in great boostograms.
Nice.
And I can feel how encouraging it is to them.
That's good.
So that's kind of the unique part of this, is you can press a button in a modern podcast app, which you can find at podcastapps.com. Try Fountain or Podverse or Cast-O-Matic, CurioCaster, Podcast Guru, Podcast Addict. There's so many of them. And you can send a message with it. So it's double. And you can use numerology, which people find fun, and you can send little pieces of Bitcoin, which can even be as low as less than a penny if you want. We encourage you to send more. Or it's time, talent, and treasure.
Yeah.
We love our wine. We love what Brian and TJ do, what Craig does. All of it contributes to Vineyard Nation. We appreciate all of that.
And the difference with value for value versus a paywall concept is this idea is that you put the information out there because information wants to be free regardless, and it's going to be free regardless. And it doesn't matter how much DRM you put on it. People are going to take a screenshot and share it on TikTok and Twitter and everything. And you put the information out there, and if people want to give you value, they can send you Bitcoin. And if you reduce that friction to the point where it's convenient for them to do it, doesn't cost them that much to do it, people will actually go and do it. So I think the low-hanging fruit, the first step is micro paywalls, and we're going to see that first because New York Times and whatnot are not going to switch to a value-for-value model. And then ultimately what we will see is we will see content creators, if that's at the end of the day, New York Times wants to call themselves a paper record. They're just a glorified content creator. Content creators that are doing value for value will get more Bitcoin for it than if you do paywalls. As always, freaks, Civil Dispatch is supported by viewers like you. What is this, PBS? We do not have ads or sponsors. We rely on your Bitcoin donations. Value for value. We just talked about it. You can support the show via Podcasting 2.0. You can support the show via our Nostr live stream. You can support the show via our dedicated donation page, all powered by Bitcoin. All the links are at ScyllaDispatch.com.
Pivoted into a show with no donors.
Yes. Well, there are a couple today, but that's just that we haven't had a show in like a month. So there's a few that trickle in, which is beautiful. And we appreciate everybody that supports the show. But I would recommend if you have a Podcasting 2.0 app, make sure that you are subscribed to us there. That way, if we are going live, your device should tell you like, wow, hey, guess what? These guys are doing a show. And also watch things like No Agenda Social, though that's harder to catch something if we're at the last minute saying we're going live in 10 minutes. That's a little harder. So I would suggest getting a Podcasting 2.0 app if you can. And then when we can, if we have something scheduled enough in advance, we'll let you know when it's going to be. Just don't expect it Wednesdays at 1 p.m. on the regular for the next bit. Let's thank our value for value supporters for this show, especially since we haven't done a show in a while.
Wow.
Yeah, I love the, I mean, sometimes it takes not doing a show for 3 weeks in order to get the donations in. But if you want to help support the show, and again, we're kind of on hiatus right now, but that doesn't mean we're not doing the shows. If you missed the whole front of the show, go back and listen to that. You can go to grumpyoldbens.com/donate. All of the information is there for this show.
Okay, brilliant. So we had four shows there in particular, which I took some snippets from, and I'll just mention I somewhat for the last two also did a little bit of editing just so I could get the compilation pictures all in one segment because they kind of split it up. So the first topic that I have got out from this was from the first show there, which was how to get extra value. So the first show that we were listening to was the Bitcoin Dad Pod, and that episode in particular was called Trialgate, and all of these were from their most recent episodes. And what I wanted to say was, many people use Patreon, for example, because it's a way to store the bonus files and behind the scenes. This is the incentive for someone who is listening in onto the show. It's like, oh yeah, come join me on Patreon because you get all of these extra things. And so that's what Patreon's business model is. They just host those extra things, which are relatively easy to, and then they get a percentage of the support that is coming in. Now, the extra incentive is a critical piece of that. And what you can kind of see with that is you pay and then you get the extra. That's how the Patreon model works. You pay, or maybe you get like a slight, little taste of what this person is putting up extra, whether it be an extra episode, behind the scenes, art, and this isn't just for podcasters. This is for all sorts of creators. This is actually inverted, I think, with Podcasting 2.0 and the apps. So, for example, with Podfans, you get extra just by joining onto Podfans and recommending your listeners to go there. And then the paying is just built right there within the app. So if you go to Podfans, for example, for this show, you're going to get chapters, you're going to get transcripts. I know Sam is working on, along with a lot of the apps, on working all these other cool things, like having the Boostergram messages show up as chapters within the actual, without me having to do it individually based on a timestamp of when they're sending it in. It's so like there's so much cool stuff going on, and it's there. So funnily enough, I would argue that the Patreon service itself is a downgraded experience. I've used it myself. I think the app and the website are awful. It pained me to have to use them, but it was because they had that extra stuff from this. In particular, it was Andreas Antonopoulos who was talking about Bitcoin, and I went there just for him, and I just couldn't do it. So what we saw there with the Bitcoin Dad Pod is he's highlighting, go over to Podverse and tune into us here, because you will get a better experience there. And this is where you can also support me. So part of the ask is making it easier for your audience, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more. But it's this essential aspect of, okay, the extra value, you need this incentive for supporting the show. You get some value, you want a little bit of extra value. This is the thing that'll tip you over and into being an actual supporter. Go over to this app and you will get a better experience. So that is one of the techniques I think that is very useful. The second show that we heard there was Kyrin the Keeper from their episode Puffer. And what you saw is they listed off a lot of names and recommendations. So one of the things that I detest just in life is people who talk the talk but don't walk the walk. And so if you don't eat your own dog food, if you don't test these things out, I really don't think that you have the right to ask people to go to these different places. Hence why I've never set up a Patreon, because I personally just find it gross. Like I can't use that service. So what we saw there with Adam and his wife Tina was like, how can they reasonably ask you to donate if I'm not doing the same thing myself? So this is where it's like the mentality is that everybody wins. And so you saw he was recommending a bunch of different podcasts, and he was listing out names of people who have contributed. It's not like someone contributes in and then you kind of like, there's somewhat this mentality that I hear of you don't want to read out how much support you're getting in, because if people hear it, then they're going to think, oh, they're already getting enough, I don't need to support them. I think that's the wrong mentality to have, because if I don't think that's how it actually happens. I think if someone hears you're getting in a ridiculous amount of support and they decide not to support because of that, they're not the person who's going to support anyway. So even if you weren't listing out how much you got, I don't think they're the type, because then you could just assume, oh, they're hiding how much they're actually receiving because it's so much, I'm not going to support anyway. You get it? You could throw it both ways, and in either case, this hypothetical person you're imagining is not going to support you. Now, what I've found in reality is that I get inspired. If I see someone boost in 222,222 to a show, that's like, goddamn, this person must really value the show. It's an incentive for me to boost in even more, to either best them or to try and match that same level of like, hey, these people are supporting, like, there's support coming in and they deserve more, because you can see, because they're getting a lot. So this is why I think it's important to talk about other podcasts, apps that are great, and even people who have helped. This is why I'll shout out Sam Sethi for tuning in live and sending through some live boosts and interacting with me. That is such a critical part of this. And so what we saw there with Adam Curry and with Tina is it's important to obviously recognize the people who are sending in support, showing that appreciation. But then I think just going that extra step of being like, this particular person did something that I really enjoyed. And it doesn't have to be monetarily wise. He was talking about people who were sending in chapter art or sending in through a bottle of wine or something like that. It's all of these little differences, and being generous with your acknowledgement of that, I think, is the way to go, rather than trying to nail it all down and be like secretive about it. Kind of coming back to transparency, which I've talked about a fair few times before. The next show that we had there was Citadel Dispatch. So this was Matt Odell, and he had a guest on. So this was CD112, Lightning Node Security with Ken of the VLS Project. And then I think there was even a bit more. So with his show, I have heard of him before. I've tuned in a couple of times to the Citadel Dispatch. It's a Bitcoin show, and he is very much getting to the heart of like the ethics of it. He's not a price sort of guy. He doesn't care about those sort of things. he's very much of like, this is what it can do to improve the world. And I think what we saw with his little pitch there was he was talking about why it's important, why it's going to succeed, this being listener support rather than the ad models, and why it makes for a better show if people support into it. So, why this show in particular needs support, and this will vary based on the show. So, for example, with No Agenda, with Adam Curry, him and John C. Dvorak, it's a central pitch of their show. It's called No Agenda. They are meant to have no agenda coming into it. They're not meant to be influenced by outside forces, which is very much what advertising and sponsorships and things will do of that nature. So, basically you're trying to explain why this method makes sense and is super important. So I think this is where the highlighting can also get onto a couple of things I talked about in season 1 of where you kind of almost need to threaten. It's like, hey, if you're not supporting the show is going to go away. I'm doing this solely through listener support, and look, you don't have to do it solely through that. There are alternative methods, but as we were talking about, like in the last show, talking about some stats, or the one before that, I should say, where I was listing out some stats. The shows that tend to do better are ones which go all in on value for value, and that's just how it works. If you're going all in on it, it makes sense. And so, yeah, I think it's important to highlight in your ask why it's important to donate, and why for your particular show it's critical. So for this value for value show, I'm never going to do ads nor sponsorship, so I'm relying solely on your support. I would love to make this my full-time job. At the moment, I'm not even close to that, and what I am doing though is at the point where it's covering costs for everything, which is super great. And I'm trying to improve this by doing all of these new things, such as being able to play audio while live. That was a new experience for me today. All of these sorts of things are critical for me to make a better show, and then make the product better for you to be able to support back. And, if you don't donate, this show will go away at some point, because I will just have to eventually find a normal job, I guess, or go back into the mining industry and all those sorts of things. So once again, very important that you highlight why people need to donate in. The last show we had there was Grumpy Old Ben's with their very amusing show title, Virgin Accountants. And what I took most from that little pitch that they had there was, you got to make it easy. And so you'll notice that many of the ones that were just listing then, so certainly the Bitcoin Dad pod and also Citadel Dispatch, right at the end they were saying like, hey, there's this website page you can go to. So for Grumpy Old Ben's, it was grumpyoldbens.com/donate. And going there is where you can have basically every manner under the sun. So I went to their website, and they had multiple QR code links for different cryptocurrencies to donate in. They had a PayPal link. They had a physical address where you could send something in. They had explainers of why it's important to donate in. And so this is where I think, links to the podcast index as well. I know people are working on buttons to be able to boost on your website as well, on any page on your website, and to still maintain the splits and things like this. It's important that you make it easy for your audience to be able to donate. So for example, if you had like a link to a Kickstarter, and you're like, okay, to find this link, go onto my Instagram, and then I've got a link tree on there. And then in the link tree, you'll find the link to my Kickstarter. That's like 3 steps to get to. In this case, it's important to make it easy. So make it easy. If you're don't know about understanding all these boosts and things, go to mereportalspodcast.com/support. I've got a run through there of my guide on the apps, which I did last week. That's now a YouTube embed on that site. I've got the links to the different apps that you can use. I've got how you can do it. I've got a little explanation of what a Satoshi is and why Bitcoin's important. And I've also got a PayPal link. So it's like, I'm doing basically everything I can to just make it easy for you and for my audience to be able to support in. And so I think this is a pretty critical aspect where if you want someone to support, don't make them have to do 7 different things. Don't make them have to, join up to this place to then be able to link over to here to then eventually get to your Patreon. Suggest an app, suggest a recommendation. One of the things that Chris Fisher does on his shows, Bitcoin Dad as well, is like, hey, try out all of these apps. If you want to keep your app, I get it. It's one of those things you can grow attached to. If your app isn't adopting this, which they probably will at some point, but if it isn't one on the leading edge, then go to the podcast index and boost in there. Or you could go into, Jupiter Broadcasting, and there's ways to support there. So just giving lots of options and a breadth of options, going from easiest to hardest, I think is something that is pretty important to do. So my last little one here is just specificity, and this is just related to all of them. Being specific with how people can support you. So the common parlance for this is the call to action, and this is why you'll hear many new podcasters talking about, leave me a review on Apple. It's really important, really helps a lot. It doesn't help a lot. The only reason that they say that is because they don't actually know what they want. So this does nothing, and it's a snap. This is a snapshot, I guess, of what I would just recommend in general. The specificity is, if you go back to episode 17 of season 1 or episode 38 of season 2, you'll get a full sum up of all the asks and the broad learnings of how you can do this. And so being specific with what you want, and you could hear, for example, on the Bitcoin Dad little episode that I played there, he was saying, if do you care about this particular thing, this topic that we talked about? I would love to know if you do or don't. And that was a very specific thing that he asked for. And so I sent him in a message saying like, you know what? I didn't really care for that topic too much. I'd prefer if you talked about these sort of ones. They don't have to do that. But if they're asking for it, it gives me that option to donate in. It's a reason to. So, this is where there's all sorts of other things like numerology and stuff like that. You're basically just looking for, people are very varied. And I know, for example, for myself, there was this blogger who I've followed for ages, long time, multiple years. And I'd never supported him. I saw his asks for support probably hundreds, if not thousands of times at the bottom of his blog posts. And then one day there was just a thing that he said in particular. It was related to, I think he had like this shirt. And it was just like, hey, by the way, another way you can support me is by buying a shirt. And even though the shirt cost, twice as much as a normal one did, this was the thing that put me over the edge of being like, you know what? I've gotten so much value from this dude. Like the very least I can do is buy a shirt from him. And so, he would have made some money from that, more if I just donated that to him exact that same amount. But it was that little thing that tipped me over the edge to get there. And so being wide with that, but also specific in terms of like, hey, you can support me by buying a shirt. That was the thing that got me there. So something to consider as well for when you're talking to your audiences, making it broad, making them have lots of easy options to be able to do it, why it's important for them to do it, being generous with your recommendations of how someone can do it, or particular people who have done something, the ways to get that extra value. And then also in the midst of all that, being specific in terms of, you can support me by doing this very exact thing. If you want a Mere Mortal shirt, which this Value for Value podcast is under, if you donate 100,000 sats, we will send a shirt your way, no matter where you are in the world. We don't even make money from it. So this is just one way of getting some support of like, hey, if this is the thing that tips you over the edge into supporting, please do it. And if you support 100,000 to this show, that is included into that little offering there, I suppose. So yep, there we go. That's the little compilation pitch that I've done. Gene Bean, I hope you enjoyed that. And just another little shout out to Sam Sethi in the Boostergram Lounge for tuning in, even though it's 2 a.m. in Turin. Very much appreciated. And speaking of the Boostergram Lounge, I'm going to go to there. But once again, so this is another shout out to someone who has helped me in the past, and this was Adam Curry. The jingle music that you hear for the Boostergram Lounge, he created that multiple times, and he created multiple ones from that. So instead of my normal one, I'm going to play you 3 of them here, and we'll enjoy those. So tune into the intro music for the Boostergram Lounge.
Welcome to the Value for Value Boostergram Lounge. Have a hookah! Welcome to the Value for Value Boostergram Lounge. Hello! It's totally insane! It's the Value for Value Boostergram Lounge! Have fun!
Oh my god. There's a reason why I don't play that first and last one. It's too much. But yes, that was the intro to the Boostergram Lounge. Thank you very much. And coming in with a live boost here, we see Sam Sethi with 8,500 sats. And he says, want a shirt? Sent using Podfans. Thank you very much, Sam. So I'll have to go check on the leaderboard again to where exactly you are in terms of the 100,000. But 8,500, that's putting you, 1/10 of the way there. So just keep that coming through, and very much appreciate it. I only do it for the actual boost messages sent in, not sat payments with the streaming amounts, because it's just it would be an absolute nightmare to calculate that. So little caveat here, it's just for the boost amounts there. I'm going to jump back into this last portion of last week, and we did have 3 messages coming in. One of those, once again, being from Sam Sethi, and he says, love the episode. Great review of the new podcast apps. Keep up the great work on educating the world on V4V. 850 cent using Podfans. Thank you very much, Podfans. Once again, a great app. Would recommend checking it out. He's on the bleeding edge, and all this cool stuff is happening, and it's becoming part of my regular routine to use Podfans, so definitely recommend checking that out. Of course, I'm going to say that though. We've got Mitch D here, though this is the owner of Podverse. He says, thanks so much for covering Podverse and all you contribute to Podcasting 2.0. Love heart. Android Auto and season support coming soon to Podverse. Of course they are. 10,000 sats sent using Podverse. Yahoo! Thank you very much, Mr. Mitch D. Once again, he's going full-time on that for a bit, and so you're going to see lots of cool stuff coming out from Podverse. And then finally, we had Jason from Podcast Guru. Just says, great episode, 9,999 sent using Podcast Guru. Thank you. The app developers are really important for my show, The Mere Mortals. I've got, I think, 5 or 6 of them in the splits, and it's important to me that I help contribute to the people who are helping to be able to contribute back to me. A little bit harder for this show, so I just do it over there on that one, but it's very much appreciated. And once again, the reason I do all of this stuff is because I think value for value is going to be just as important as open sources to the world. For example, moving forward, the main a lot of the problems I see with social media, for example, are driven just by the advertising models, and so I think having a way for people to connect peer-to-peer, send money directly. It doesn't matter where they are in the world. If there's an Iranian and they want to send me money, that's totally fine. I'm not in the US, so I don't know how strict our money controls are, but I've tried to send just, $25 to, once again, talking about shirts, try to send $25 to a bank account in the UK. They're my brethren. Sam Sethi we're practically related. And sending a small payment like that just to a bank account was an absolute nightmare. Took multiple hours of effort. So doing it through Bitcoin, doing it through a podcasting app is so much better, easier, and I think is definitely the future, which is why I continue to cover all of these sorts of things. Okay, let's jump on to the tips section, and I've been kind of collecting we're doing a compilation episode, so let's keep going on. A compilation of tips that I've just collected here in my little notes for this past while. I was going to bring them up at some point, but I just never, it didn't really fit in. So once again, compilation makes sense to do it here. So I've got 5 extra tips that I've got for you here, which we didn't see highlighted in that actual clip compilation. So number 1, numerology. I think this one's self-explanatory. If someone has a number that is important to them, it can actually be useful in saying like, hey, if you send this in, this is what this means. And it's just a fun way of doing things. I, for example, almost always boost in a row of ducks, 2,222, because the number 2 looks like a duck. I get it. It doesn't actually look like a duck, but it's kind of funny. And it's an amount which feels good for me, because when I do the math, I'm like, if I listen to this show, that's about with the amount I'm streaming in as well and a boost that I send in, that is equal to about an Australian dollar. When I send that in, I'm going to be listening to probably this show weekly, maybe even more than weekly. That's going to be $50 to $100 a year. You know what? That's an amount that I feel justifies listening to this show. And so the 2222s, they don't really mean anything. It's a nice amount. But the encouragement to boost in for a special anniversary for the Mere Mortals, we had 400 episodes, so people were sending in a bunch of 4s. One had a baby, and so we had the Bebe boost, the 3838, which one of our listeners, Peter, really enjoys, and that's the one that he sends in most nowadays. All of these sorts of things, I helped to, on one of the GitHubs, I helped update the Boostergram list, which includes a lot of the reasons that you'll see these numbers in on the Bitcoin Dad and a lot of other Chris Fisher shows. People send in their zip code boost. So, it'll be like 18730 or something like that. And then it's kind of like, oh, where are they in the world? Let's try and find that out. Oh, they're in Germany. Oh, they're in here. So you can do that wherever you are in the world as well. And it's just finding a number which is important. So once again, highlighting the numerology. Gamification is pretty important. Pod fans, you see Sam is trying to do that and make it fun to experiment with the app. Oh, I can send in a boost and get some extra sats. Oh, I can try creating a clip. I get some extra sats. This is pretty cool. So doing that within the actual app itself, and then as in terms of me as the podcaster, I know Adam Curry on his show, Curry and the Keeper, he was doing double boost for a certain period. So if you boosted in 3,000, it would count as 6,000. I don't know if he had a leaderboard. I don't know if that was, it was more just to be like, yeah, if you donate this, you can get acknowledgement as an executive producer instead of just a producer. All of these things, triggering a jingle, getting a shirt, leaderboards. There's a leaderboard on the meremortalspodcast.com/support. You can see where you rank in terms of people there. And the top 5, we put like an image with the face on it and things like that. So extra highlighting of people who are doing it. I know Sam is also in Pod Fans. He's doing like this kind of Pod Fan, super fan leaderboard sort of thing. There's all sorts of cool stuff going on. So gamification, super important. I've mentioned this before, but value for value in Bitcoin, it's not an either or. They can coexist alongside each other, along with advertising and fiat. There's also the room for kind of hard standpoints like myself, which is can be a bit of a differentiator, but the showcasing the support, it's not like your call to action has to only be, oh, support me via this way. I only enjoy fiat. I only enjoy dollars, so you have to do it via PayPal or something like that. No, include those extra options if you don't have a strong reason not to. I have a very strong reason why I don't have a Patreon set up, so I don't do that, even though I know there are people who have told me they would support via Patreon if I had it. That's one of those things, you got to make the decision yourself. Generally, it's better to have more, but if you want to be a bit more strict on it and have a preference, I certainly have a preference for boostergrams via PayPal, but I do have a PayPal link set up and it's in the show notes. If you want to use it, please donate via there and I'll acknowledge you just as much as I do for a boostergram. Giving a reason why someone should contribute, even if it's really tenuous, I think helps. So if you've got a charity drive, if you've got a target goal to activate the boost bot, which they do on Behind the Schemes, if it's your birthday, if it's an anniversary coming up, just giving people a reason to. Once again, this is getting into the kind of specificity, the call to action, the making it easy portion. If you just make it easy, even if it's, there's this great stuff from psychology where basically if you have like a lineup, they did this with people, university students waiting to use the printer. So if you've ever been to university, you'll know the printer is always just chock-a-block full of people wanting to use it in the library. And what they did was there'd be this long lineup and they'd have someone cut in right near the front. And one, they did a couple options. One would be like, if they just cut in, and without saying anything. Another one would be cutting in with the excuse of like, hey, excuse me, I'm like running a bit late behind. I really need to jump in. Can I just jump in here? And then the third option was just saying like, hey, excuse me, do you mind if I go in front of you? I need to use the printer. And funnily enough, one of the big long-winded excuse of, I needed to do this sort of thing, and the excuse of like, excuse me, I need to use the printer, they worked kind of equally as well in terms of people allowing them to come in, which is really funny because obviously they need to use the printer. It's just self-explanatory, but it's almost like the magical act of saying, hey, I need to do this thing. It just, there's something in our brains which is like, oh, okay, yeah, that's okay, that's fine. I'll help you out with regards to that. So, if I have a target that I want to reach to for this episode, so let's just say it's 40,000. I'd love to get 40,000 coming in for this episode. Even if there's no reason in terms of like, obviously the more is better. And if I was only getting like 3,000 before that, there's something about just having a target and saying I want more, which is like people will be like, oh, okay, I'll send you more. So just having any reason, to be honest, can actually help. And then the last one I had here was share, praise, and celebrate the big wins. So, the more boosts that come in, the more people also want to join in. It's this weird cycle where if you hear a show with 50 boosts in it, getting close to like, the podcasting 2.0 level of they read out a lot of messages. This is where it's whatever your intuitions are in regards that, oh, if they're getting lots of boosts, I won't send one in. They don't need it. That's just wrong. That's not how people think. It's more encouraging. And the people who do think like that, they're not going to send it in anyway. So it's very much, you got to have this mentality of like, people are generally good. The pie grows, and you're not, if I get more boosts in on this show, it's not because I'm stealing them from another person's show. If you're that sort of mentality, that's value for value is not going to really work out for you. Now, it can be hard at the start when you don't have many people boosting in. So this is when you have to hustle for those family and friend connections to jumpstart it. I know in America Plus, Cole McCormick, who's boosted in a fair few times, he was getting like his mum and his girlfriend to boost in. That is, I think, super valid and also necessary at times. So, yep, that's that another little compilation section there of some additional things to think about when you're doing your ask. My apps as service highlight for today. Look, there's quite a few guides out there on not only how to boost in and how to receive listener support. That whole last episode I did was all around this, but on how to ask as well. So I'm just going to give a couple of those, and you'll see in the show notes some links for these. So Fountain did a webinar with rss.com where they were talking about how you can do this. They also had Chris Fisher on as a guest there, obviously someone who knows how to do this, because multiples of his shows are right up there in terms of the most popular ones getting lots of support. Valueforvalue.info. This is Adam Curry's website explaining it. Real nice, sharp, and to the point reasons of how you do it, why you do it, and what to expect. GetAlby has a great blog at blog.getalby.com, which does this. And look, a lot of the hosting companies that are enabling V4V have some sort of guidelines on not only on how to implement it, just as the podcaster, but also how to ask your audience. So you'll find this like either on their Twitter accounts. Podfans, I know, has this, and it explains why it's important. I know Blueberry has their own blog and podcast where they've also got very similar things going on. So If you are wondering, perhaps listening to a value for value podcast isn't for you, perhaps you want to do it a different way, look, there's plenty of other options in terms of video, in terms of text, where you can read about how to do this as well. But I think a compilation like I did today was also helpful just in terms of setting the tone. And you can also see all of these shows were different. Multiple of them were like conversational ones. One was like, people just speaking into a mic. The topics could be about Bitcoin. Topics could be about, family, religion, God. Could be talking about just random politics and stuff. It doesn't really matter the show. It's just about how you ask your audience for value, and that, of course, that you're providing something that is valuable that people want to listen to. Okay, nice. We're at our rough cutoff minute of the 45-minute mark. So today, my 15% of value for value, I'm going to give to all of the clippers. So there was about 5 of them, or 5 main value blocks that I've seen. So I'm going to give 3% to each of them. Was able to split this up roughly on what is in their feeds. Perhaps in the future, I could do value time splits. So for those minute-long sections, I could create in those chapters, I could have the value time split. I'm with Blueberry at the moment, so I'm not able to do that. But it is kind of fun to be able to just create a compilation or have some songs or something like that to be able to use and then be able to do this. So, for this value time splits in the future, will this turn into like maybe I'll start to add a little bit of music into the show? Potentially. I got to think about it. It's a lot of work, but I'm really enjoying doing these sorts of things and testing and experimenting. So we'll have a look with that. So yeah, 15% to them. Value for value. This is the value for value show, and I run this model. So there's 3, I suppose, ways to contribute back: the time, talent, and treasure. Time, share this episode with a digital creator. I think that's probably the most important thing you could do. If someone is struggling to realize how they can do it, send them this episode in particular and say like, hey, here's a compilation of people doing it. Once again, I would also recommend checking out season 2, because that's where I was really focusing on podcasting and podcasters and creating clips and a very similar thing to what I was doing in today's episode. So going back to season 2 was also helpful. And come join me live. I love having Sam Sethi here listening in. It's very much appreciated. I know Juan, my co-host, was also listening in for a while. It's so much fun to have like these little interactions. So I'm live on a 10 a.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Typically, it has been on a Wednesday, so this would be UTC midnight. I'm going to always be at this UTC, UCT. I always say UTC. UCT, Universal Coordinated Time midnight. So wherever you are in the world, in the plus or minus, just plus or minus that off from midnight. And then that's the time that I'll be going live. So Sam has obviously said it was 2 a.m. where he was at. So he was obviously at a -2. No, sorry, +2 from wherever he is in Italy and Turin. So yeah, join me in on those. The schedule will slightly change in the future, but it'll always be at roughly that time. So check out your podcasting app for the live notification. Talent, is there anything I can do to make this show better? What annoys you? Is there any topics, things that you really want me to consider? I did this episode in particular because I had someone who was wanting a compilation. So, I created that, and I hope that they got a lot of value from that, and I hope you do as well. So that would be great, just having some recommendations. What do you really want me to focus on in terms of the value for value? This is more of an educational show than anything else. And then finally, treasure. There's 3 options. Try out one of the new podcasting apps. Go to the last episode and pick one of those, the 8 that I listed there, and send me in a boost via that. You can also go to the Podcast Index website, type in value, then the number 4, or just even type in my name, Kyrin, Kyrin, and I'll pop up pretty quickly. You can boost in there, and that acknowledges all the splits as well. And then finally, you could do this via at meremortalspodcast.com/support, and then I've got the PayPal link there. I've got all of the other, you're able to boost in via directly onto there as well. So a lot of things you can do, and I just want to thank you for joining me into this episode. 2 more episodes for this season, and then I'll wrap it up, probably have a little bit of a break, maybe a couple of weeks, break and then come back in through season 4 because I am really having a lot of fun with this show. So we'll leave it there. Thank you everyone for joining me, and ciao for now. Until the next time, Kyrin out.